You want to know what a lie feels like when it's big enough to change a war. Not a small lie. Not the kind you tell to get through a day or protect someone you love. I mean a lie so enormous, so carefully built, so perfectly maintained, that it moved armies, that it kept men frozen in place while history was being decided somewhere else entirely, that it killed people by keeping other people alive. I've thought about this for a long time, longer than you might expect, because I was one of the people it was designed to protect. And I didn't know it. None of us did. We were crossing the channel in the dark, sick from the swells, rifles held above the water, thinking about whether our boots would fill before we hit the sand. And somewhere in London, a man we had never heard of was sending a coded message to people who wanted to kill him. A message that was going to keep the worst of what was waiting for us pointed somewhere else. If you're new here, stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is not the day-to-day story you were taught in school. It's the one underneath it, the one that made the other one possible. And when you understand both of them together, you'll never look at that morning the same way again. Subscribe now and stay close, because this one matters. Let me go back, all the way back to what 1943 actually felt like from inside it, because history has a way of smoothing things over, of making the outcome seem inevitable when it wasn't, when it was anything but. In late 1943, nobody inside Allied Command was certain this was going to work. I need you to understand that the men planning the invasion of France were not planning it with confidence. They were planning it with the knowledge that, if it went wrong, there might not be another chance. The political will, the resources, the sheer accumulated cost of another failed attempt. It was almost too much to think about. One shot, that's what it was. The Germans knew we were coming. That was never the question. Hitler knew. Rommel knew. The entire Atlantic Wall had been built in anticipation of exactly this moment. Thousands of miles of concrete and wire and steel and prearmed artillery running all the way from Norway down to Spain, built by men who understood amphibious assault and designed defenses accordingly. The beaches were not undefended. They were waiting. The only thing the Germans didn't know, the only gap in everything they had prepared, was where. And that gap, that single uncertainty, was the crack we were going to drive a wedge into. A wedge so carefully constructed, so precisely aimed at the way the German mind worked, that they never saw it coming. Not before. Not during. Not even after. Not for weeks. The place we chose was Normandy. 5 beaches along a stretch of coast in northern France. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Not the obvious choice. The Germans expected us at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the channel, the most direct route, the most logical approach by every conventional measure. And that expectation, that certainty they had built up over months of intelligence and analysis and map study. That was the weapon we were going to use against them. There was a man named Erwin Rommel, and I want you to understand something about him before we go further, because he almost stopped everything, not because he was cruel, not because he was fanatical the way some of them were, but because he understood the problem with a clarity that should have terrified us. Rommel had walked those beaches himself, stood in the sand, looked at the water, thought about how a landing actually works. And he reached a conclusion that was correct. The invasion had to be stopped on the beach, on the first day, in the first hours. If we got ashore and started building a beachhead, if the supplies started coming in and the reinforcements followed, it was over. The weight of what America and Britain could put through a secured beachhead was something no defensive line on French soil was going to stop. His answer was the Panzers. Put the armor close to the coast, not held back in reserve, not waiting to counterattack after the landing location was confirmed. Forward, ready, able to reach the beach in hours instead of days. And he fought hard for this, argued it up through the command structure with the urgency of a man who could see what was coming. He lost the argument, not because his logic was wrong, it was right, but because the command structure above him was broken in ways that would prove fatal. Hitler kept personal control of the armored reserves. They could not be committed without his direct order, and Hitler on the morning that mattered, was going to receive intelligence, telling him the Normandy landings were a diversion. There's something else I need to tell you about Rommel. Something that sounds almost too strange to be true. On the night of June 5th, 1944, the night the fleet crossed the Channel, Rommel was not at his headquarters. He was in Germany. At his wife's birthday, he had looked at the weather reports, decided the conditions were too rough for an invasion, and gone home. The gap between the weather intelligence the Germans were reading and the weather intelligence the Allies had access to. That gap, the distance between what Rommel saw and what Eisenhower's meteorologist saw when he found that one narrow window of acceptable conditions in a week of storms. That gap is part of why I'm still here to tell you this story. The small things. I keep coming back to the small things. A birthday, a weather report, a duty officer who went to sleep instead of waking his commander. These are the things that history books skip past because they don't fit the narrative of large forces and inevitable outcomes. But they are the things that actually decided it. Now let me tell you about the lie itself, the architecture of it, because it was not simple, and it was not quick, and it did not come from one person. It came from hundreds of people working across years, in conditions of secrecy so complete that most of them couldn't tell their own families what they were doing. The operation was called Fortitude, and the first thing you need to understand about it is that it was not built on concealment. You cannot hide 150,000 men preparing to invade. You cannot make thousands of ships invisible in English harbors. The Germans knew something massive was coming. Their reconnaissance aircraft had seen it. Their signals intelligence had felt the shape of it. Their analysts had tracked the build-up for months. What Fortitude did instead was something more sophisticated and more dangerous. It built a false truth so large, so consistent, so carefully aligned with what the Germans already believed, that the real truth drowned inside it. It didn't fight the German intelligence picture. It fed it. It gave the German analysts exactly what their assumptions were already prepared to receive. The centerpiece was a ghost, an army that did not exist. The first United States Army group, FUSAG, no soldiers, no tanks, no supply lines, no field hospitals, nothing, just signals. False radio traffic generated by trained operators following scripts that reproduced exactly how a real army group of that size would communicate. Volume, routing, procedure, all of it. And they filled fields across southeastern England with inflatable rubber tanks, artillery pieces made of canvas and air, vehicles carrying the insignia of units that existed only on paper, all of it positioned where German reconnaissance aircraft would photograph it, all of it pointing across the narrowest stretch of the Channel toward the Potomac. And then they gave this ghost army a commander. And the commander they chose was the one American general the German High Command genuinely feared, General George S. Patton. I want you to think about what the Germans knew about Patton by early 1944. They had watched him in Sicily, watched the speed of it, the aggression, the way he pushed his men past the point where other commanders would have stopped and consolidated. In the German military tradition, which prizes exactly that kind of offensive instinct, Patton was the enemy they respected most, the one they would least want to see across a line from them. In assessment after assessment, in the meetings where German staff officers tried to map the Allied command structure and assign weights to each commander, Patton came out at the top. Above Montgomery, above Bradley, above everyone. He was the most dangerous American they had seen, and they watched him very carefully. So, when intelligence reports began confirming that Patton was commanding an enormous army group in southeastern England, pointed at Pas-de-Calais, the Germans didn't question it. They absorbed it. It confirmed exactly what their logic had already told them. The Americans would not waste their best commander on a diversion. Wherever Patton was pointed was where the real blow was coming. The trap was built from their own reasoning, and they walked into it completely. Patton's actual role required something I find difficult even now to fully describe. He had to perform the appearance of preparing the most important assault of his career, while knowing the assault was fiction, while knowing that real men were going to land on real beaches and fight in real blood because his fake army was keeping. The German armor pointed somewhere else. He attended events, gave speeches, was photographed in the right places. Every appearance managed to sustain the fiction, and he carried the weight of what that meant without breaking. But the deception had a deeper layer, the one that operated in the darkest part of the shadow world. And this one is almost impossible to fully believe, even when you know it's true. B. 1944. Every single German intelligence agent operating in Britain was either in British custody or working directly for British intelligence. Everyone, the Germans believed they had a productive spy network inside England. What they actually had was a performance, a carefully written, precisely timed, centrally managed performance. And everything those agents reported. Every confirmation that FUSAG was real. Every detail that reinforced the German picture of Pas-de-Calais as the primary target. All of it had been written and approved by Allied planners. The committee that ran this operation was called the XX Committee, the double cross system, and its crown jewel was a man the Germans knew as Arabel. The British knew him as Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol Garcia, and he was Spanish, and he had no institutional training, and he came to this work entirely on his own. Pujol hated fascism. Not abstractly, not ideologically in the academic sense, personally, viscerally, in the way that makes a person do things that most people would consider either heroic or insane, depending on whether they work. He approached British intelligence early in the war and offered to spy for them. They turned him down. So he went to the Germans instead, convinced them he was a Spanish sympathizer relocating to London, willing to serve as an agent for the Reich. And they believed him, and they paid him, and they gave him a communication protocol. He moved to Lisbon, not London. He had never been to England in his life. And from Lisbon, with a British railway timetable and a tourist guidebook and nothing else, he began inventing subagents who didn't exist, with names and personalities and cover stories. Intelligence reports assembled from public information with such meticulous attention to internal consistency that German intelligence rated his material among the most reliable they received from Britain. He built an entire fictional world, populated by people who breathed and moved and reported and had opinions, all of it existing only in his imagination and in the documents he sent across the wire. And the Germans never suspected, because the world he built held together the way a real world holds together, with its own logic, its own rules, its own people who behave the same way from one report to the next. When he approached British intelligence a second time, carrying his German correspondence as proof of what he'd done alone, they brought him to London immediately. And from that point forward, everything he told his German handlers served the deception. By spring of 1944, German intelligence had the picture they had been given. FUSAG was real. Patton commanded it. The main Allied strike was coming and when the invasion came, it would come there. Now, I need to tell you about the night before, because I think about it still. I think about what those hours felt like for the men who didn't know any of what I've just told you. The fleet was enormous. Nearly 7,000 ships, and it crossed in total darkness. Blacked out, in seas rough enough that men below decks were sick, holding on with both hands, trying not to think about what was waiting on the other side. Most of them had been told only what they needed to know. They knew the beach they were assigned to. They knew the general shape of what was coming. They did not know that somewhere in London a man named Juan Pujol Garcia was at his transmitter, sending a message that was going to keep the worst of the German armor pointed in the wrong direction. Some of them wrote letters that night, folded them carefully, and put them in pockets, addressed to people they weren't certain they would see again. Some of them prayed. Some of them sat in silence and let the noise of the engines and the sea cover the silence inside them. And some of them made the kind of dark jokes that soldiers make when the alternative is saying out loud what they're actually thinking. Nobody slipped at Omaha Beach. What happened in the first hours was worse than the plan had anticipated. The bombers released late, their loads falling inland, missing the defenses almost entirely. The naval bombardment was not long enough. The specialized armor that was supposed to precede the infantry was largely swallowed by the rough seas before it reached the beach. The men who came ashore in the first wave walked into something that should have killed all of them, and they kept going. I need you to hold that." They kept going, in surf that was red around them, with the men from the boats beside them already gone, with no cover and no plan that still applied to what they were actually facing. They kept going because the only direction that wasn't dying in the water was forward. That is, the human cost of the lie, the weight of what it was protecting, not an abstraction, not a strategic objective on a colored map. Those men in that water, on that sand. Now let me tell you what was happening that same night on the other side of the intelligence war. Allied aircraft were over the Strait of Dover, dropping clouds of aluminum chaff that created enormous false radar returns on German screens. Signatures that looked exactly like a large fleet approaching from southeastern England toward Small boats were crossing the water, towing radar reflectors in coordinated patterns, adding movement and detail to the false picture. And phantom radio networks that had been running for months were transmitting with the urgency of units preparing to embark. And Garbo was sending the most important message of his life. He contacted his German handler in the early hours of June 6th with urgent intelligence. His network had obtained information suggesting a major landing was imminent. He needed this at the highest level immediately. He transmitted with the greatest priority his protocol allowed. The message was deliberately timed to arrive too late. The decoded transmission reached Abwehr headquarters at 4 in the morning. The first Allied soldiers were already in the water at Normandy. The landing had begun. German intelligence was furious. This could have been actionable. Garbo's network had advance warning, and the system had failed to process it in time. And now there was a real danger that this failure might compromise the most valuable agent they had. Garbo answered that danger before it fully formed. He sent back a message of extraordinary anger. He attacked the duty officer who had failed to process his report. He demanded to know how intelligence of this quality had been allowed to sit in an in-tray while the invasion happened around it. He performed the rage of a man who had risked everything for people who had failed him at the moment that mattered most. The performance was so complete, so emotionally convincing, so entirely consistent with how a genuine committed agent would respond, that the Germans could only reach one conclusion. Their agent was beyond suspicion. The failure was theirs. They apologized to Garbo. They asked him to keep reporting. His credibility didn't decline. It strengthened. The Germans were more invested in him than before. And so, as men were dying on those beaches, as the casualty reports from Omaha were coming in at numbers that suggested to the officers reading them that the entire operation might be failing, Garbo wrote the message that the entire deception had been designed to produce. He told his German handlers that Normandy was not the main invasion. His network had confirmed it from multiple independent sources. FUSAG remained staged and ready. Patton's army had not moved. The forces at Normandy were a large-scale feint, designed to draw German reserves out of position before the real blow fell. At Pas-de-Calais hold the reserves, the decisive battle was still coming. Hitler received this assessment, and Hitler, who had been anxious about Pas-de-Calais for months, who had always believed his own strategic instinct, who trusted Arabelle above almost all other sources, made the decision. He held the Panzers. The 1st SS Panzer Division, the 12th SS Panzer they sat waiting, engines idling, crews watching the sky, commanders receiving orders that told them to hold position. They waited while the beachhead formed, while the first trickle of Allied reinforcements became a stream, and the stream became a flood. They waited while the window in which massed armored power could have driven to the beach and pushed us back into the sea closed, 1 hour at a time. Irreversibly, I think about those Panzer crews sometimes, waiting in their staging areas, watching the reports come in from Normandy, feeling the urgency of it, knowing what their armor could do, and receiving orders to hold, to wait for the second landing that was never coming. I wonder if any of them felt it, that quiet shift, that moment where the logic of what they'd been told and the evidence of what was actually happening stopped aligning. Weeks passed. Garbo kept filing. FUSAG radio traffic kept running. The entire apparatus sustained the fiction past the point where it had any real military value, because the planners understood that every additional week the German reserve stayed, pointed at the wrong place, was another week the breakout could develop before they could be repositioned. By the time the German High Command accepted the truth, that there was no second invasion, that FUSAG was a ghost, that Arabelle was something other than what they believed, the Allied beachhead was unbreakable. The breakout was beginning. The war in the West had been decided. Now I want to tell you something about why it worked. Because the Germans were not stupid, Rommel's instinct was correct. The German intelligence apparatus was sophisticated and experienced, and they were still deceived so completely that they never recovered from it. The deception worked because it was built around what the Germans needed to believe, not just what they could be made to believe. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. The Pas-de-Calais made sense by every measure of conventional military logic. The Germans had invested enormous resources in defending it, positioned their best formations there, oriented their entire defensive architecture around it. To accept that the real invasion was at Normandy was not just to update an intelligence assessment, it was to accept that everything they had built was pointed in the wrong direction, that years of preparation had been aimed at the wrong place. The mind does not readily accept that. The institutional mind, the command mind, the mind under pressure with enormous stakes. It looks instead for ways to make the new information fit the old picture. It finds reasons why the anomalies are explicable, why the contradiction can be resolved, why the framework that was built with such care is still essentially correct. Garbo's message gave Hitler exactly what he needed. Not a lie more convincing than the physical reality of 150,000 men on a beach. Just a credible story from a trusted source that allowed the existing picture to survive contact with evidence that should have destroyed it. A framework that absorbed the contradiction and neutralized it. This is the deepest mechanism in the deception, and it extends far beyond military history. The most dangerous lie is not the one that contradicts what you believe. That triggers skepticism, demands verification, raises flags. The most dangerous lie is the one that confirms it, that arrives in the exact shape your mind was already prepared to receive. That feels, at every step, like intelligence working the way it's supposed to. The Germans were not deceived, despite their intelligence. They were deceived through it. Their analysis produced a compelling picture, and that picture became the lens through which they interpreted everything that followed, including the false signals that had been specifically designed to look exactly right through that lens. And then there is the matter of the Iron Cross. On June 29, 1944, 23 days after while men were still dying in the hedgerow country of Normandy, German intelligence awarded Juan Pugel Garcia the Iron Cross, one of the highest military decorations the Third Reich could give. For his service, for his courage, for the reliability of his network over years of dangerous work on behalf of Germany, Garcia accepted the decoration, thanked his handlers, expressed his continued commitment to the mission. Then he went back to his transmitter and told his British handler that deception was holding. The man most responsible for the German defeat at Normandy was receiving medals from the country he had helped destroy. The entire intelligence apparatus of the most powerful military state in Europe had been inverted so completely that it was honoring the instrument of its own undoing. I don't have a better image than that for what the intelligence war actually was. What it looks like when a constructed reality holds so completely that the people inside it cannot see the walls. When the deception is so total that the enemy celebrates the architect of their own defeat after the war. Garcia could not speak about what he had done. Not for decades, the double-cross system remained classified. The men and women who had built and maintained it went back to lives that gave no indication of what they had been part of. Garcia moved to Venezuela, built a new life under a different name. People who knew him had no idea they were talking to the man who had received both an Iron Cross from Germany and an MBE from Britain. Almost certainly the only person in history formally decorated by both sides in the same war. He was found by a historian in the 1980s, came out of decades of silence, gave interviews, received recognitions he had earned 40 years earlier, returned to Britain to shake hands with people who had worked alongside him in rooms that no longer existed in a war that had been over for a generation. He died in 1988. By then, the full scope of what he had done was beginning to be understood by historians working through the declassified archives. But even now, even with everything known, his name appears in a paragraph. In the popular histories of D-Day, the beaches get the attention. The armies get the credit. The man who kept the Panzers frozen gets a footnote. I think about that sometimes, about what it means that the most consequential act of the entire operation, the act that did more than any other single thing to determine whether those men had a chance, was performed by one self-trained Spanish civilian with no rank, no institution, no public recognition during the years it mattered, and no way to explain to anyone he met what he had spent those years doing. The soldiers on those beaches deserve everything that has ever been said about them. What they did in that water is beyond the reach of ordinary words. They moved forward because it needed to be done, and the ones who came through did so partly because the ones who fell before them had already cleared some of the way. But they had a chance. A real fighting chance. Because of something they never knew. Because in London, a man with no training and no institutional backing was sending lies to people who would have killed him without hesitation. Because every German spy in Britain was a British puppet. Because inflatable rubber tanks in English fields and phantom radar signals over the Dover Strait and a German duty officer who went to sleep were all part of the same vast, invisible machinery that kept the worst of what was waiting pointed somewhere else. For just long enough. This is the war nobody fully teaches, the one fought with patience and psychology and sustained construction of realities that don't exist, by people who could never be credited, who spent decades unable to speak of it, who watched the histories written around them while the thing they had built went unacknowledged. They deserve better than the silence they received, and now you know. If this story is still moving in you, if there's a part of it you can't quite put down, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because there are more stories like this one, more of the machinery beneath the history you thought you knew, more of the rooms and the minds and the decisions that didn't make it into the textbooks. The history you were taught was the surface. This is what was underneath it. And we are not done.